From his incredible KO of Chad Mendes to his all-out war against Brian Ortega, Alexander Volkanovski's career is full of unbelievable and insane moments, starting with the fight against Chad Mendes. Mendes was on an absolute tear through the UFC back when he first appeared on the scene. This man was so good he got to fight all the biggest names in the division, like McGregor and Jose Aldo. So, needless to say, this fight was a pretty big deal for Volk, especially since he wasn't the champ back then. Mendes was one of the first big tests the UFC gave to this man on his path to Max Holloway and the featherweight championship. And honestly, Chad put up a pretty great fight. I mean, the man was killing it in the first round. And not only did he outwork Volk on the feet, but he also got a takedown to seal the round. That wasn't it though. He then proceeded to knock the Aussie down in the second round and eventually took him down again, this time taking his back. It was looking genuinely bad for Volk. He was losing the fight and it was one of those high pressure make it or break it moments. And boy did the man deliver. After being taken down in the second, Volk turned up the heat and landed some insanely accurate and heavy shots to Mendes's body. And before anyone knew it, Volk had knocked the man out. As epic as this moment was though, it only scratches the surface of Volk's legacy. And one of Volk's very next fights was against the legendary Jose Aldo. Now, you've got to remember, guys, that at this point, Aldo was pretty much a mythical beast, and his dominance was very much intact. Yup, at the time that Volk stepped into the octagon with Aldo, the man had only been defeated twice, once by McGregor and once by the champion of the time, Max Holloway. Alex was not the favorite going into this fight, and the fans didn't know what was gonna end up happening. Aldo's greatness didn't stop the Aussie beast though, and he outworked the ex-champ throughout every single round of their bout. Plus, he did this while the Brazilian fans were going absolutely wild in the stands for every little thing that Aldo did. The victory over Aldo was insane because not only did Volkanovski beat the legend, but he did it with absolute dominance. Also, this was the man's 17th straight win, and it was arguably the most important one of his career because this was the win that opened the doors to his first title fight against the blessed Max Holloway. Now, before I get into his battles with Max though, let me take you guys back in time to another epic moment in this man's career, one that truly set the tone of dominance for the rest of his career. Yep, I'm talking about his fight against Yusuke Kasuya back in 2016. Kasuya might not be a name a lot of you recognize, but let me tell you, the guy was no pushover. He had a genuinely impressive ground game, and the UFC wasn't just giving Volk an easy first fight. I mean, why would they? By the time he was debuting for the UFC, the man was already on a huge win streak. Anyway, the Aussie beast definitely felt the strength of Kasuya's ground game early on in the first round. But then, just like he did against Aldo and Mendes, he turned up the heat and started outworking the guy. But that wasn't all. He displayed how versatile he was and beat Kasuya at his own game. Yep, he took the man down and beat him via TKO after a brutal and long ground and pound session. It was absolute dominance, and it was insane to see a fighter perform with such confidence in their debut. Ever since then, there's been no slowing down for Alexander the Great, and he's dominated the best of the best, exactly like what he did to the blessed Max Holloway in their first fight. I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that Volk has beaten Max 3 times by this point, but don't let that fool you. Max was and still is one of the greatest featherweights to ever exist, and he's definitely one of the greatest featherweight champions to ever hold the title. The guy was on a 14-fight win streak when he came up against Alexander the Great Volkanovski, and even though no one was counting out Max, at this point everyone was aware that Volk might surprise us all and dethrone the apparently invincible featherweight king, and that is exactly what he did. But the way he got it done was honestly so insane, it was almost unbelievable. Not only did Volk win, but he also won via unanimous decision. Yep, that means he won through complete dominance. And this is even more impressive when you consider that in title fights, the champ gets a huge scoring advantage in the UFC. Throughout the fight, it looked like Holloway just wasn't able to reach Volk, and the much smaller Aussie was on fire. In fact, he looked faster and was landing big shots throughout the fight. The dominance with which Volk defeated this seemingly invincible fighter was insane on its own. But what he did next was even crazier. He beat Max twice more, and each time the these two men clashed, Volk seemed stronger and sharper. Now, Max still seemed unbeatable when it came to any other fighter in the division, but Volkanovski was so good that there was absolutely no doubt that he was the better man. Yup, the gap between Volk and the rest of the division was huge, and it was seemingly only widening. Max looked amazing in the second fight, and he seemed to be a totally different fighter. The man had clearly trained specifically to beat Volk, and even that fell short somehow, because, true to his name, the Great won via unanimous decision once again. Now, there is a clear understanding in MMA that anything can happen, and also that the same guy doesn't win every single time. But somehow when these two faced off again for the third time, an otherwise very dominant Holloway was once again helpless against Volk. As good as Max clearly was, the greatest challenge in the featherweight division to Alexander's belt actually came from somewhere else. Yep, I'm finally talking about Brian Ortega. This fight was honestly just a war. It was the closest we ever came to seeing Alexander lose in the UFC up till that point, and no one could believe what they were seeing. For real, Ortega wasn't messing around, and just like Max Holloway, he wasn't slowing down no matter how much punishment the Aussie put him through. This was truly one of those nail-biter fights. Every single round was tense, and I don't know about you guys, but I think I lost some years off my lifespan watching these two go at it. I mean, no one in the audience, not even the professional commentators, knew what was gonna happen next. 1 second, Ortega's face was being cut open by Volk's intense strikes, and the next second he had somehow taken the champ down. The craziest moment, though, was when Ortega caught Alex with a punch and knocked him down. What happened next was the cleanest transition into a guillotine choke I think anyone's ever seen. Ortega went from being constantly battered to somehow having the tightest choke around Volk's neck. And just when it looked like he was gonna win the title, the Aussie escaped and made it back to his feet. Ortega was genuinely about to win multiple times, and every single time Alex somehow got through it. This was definitely the most insane moment of his reign as featherweight champ. But there's still one thing I haven't mentioned. That's right, the Islam Makhachev fight. Volkanovski lost this fight, but honestly, it wasn't much of a defeat. He lost to the most dominant champ the lightweight division has seen since Khabib, and it was a very close fight. Not only was he fighting a monster, he was fighting a man a weight class up, and he still managed to seem dominant. There's not much more to say, but it was definitely crazy how somehow, despite losing, Volk's incredible performance convinced everyone that he deserved to be the pound-for-pound #1. Well, there you have it. Those were the most insane moments of Alexander Volkanovski's career. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.